Good morning, everybody. Today is March 31st, 2022, and welcome to the New Possibilities Hour, part of the Will Work for Food project, founded by Natalie Armstrong-Motin in the spring of 2020. Every week, Jean Lawler and I host another cutting-edge webinar on subjects related to mediation, arbitration, negotiation, and lawyering generally. There's no charge for these great webinars. Rather, we ask people to contribute to a food bank if they like what they see. And our audiences have been so generous in contributing to fight food insecurity worldwide in honor of our great speakers. And one of the best parts of the program every week is when we announce the running total, contributions of which we're aware. Jean, we've got big news this week. Would you please?
Well, we're moving well beyond $250,000 now. $256,282, excuse me, and 50 cents, 50. It's fantastic. Thank you all.
Amazing, amazing. And to add to our list of great speakers and great presentations today, we have Ken Roberts. I'll introduce him very briefly. Ken is one of the most mediation-savvy lawyers with whom I have worked in my 26 years of practice as a mediator. Ken is based in Chicago. He's the head of the construction litigation group, the national group at Venable, which is a powerhouse in the construction litigation and dispute resolution arena. Without further ado, I want to turn it over to Ken to tell us a little bit about the food bank to which you would like people to direct contributions if they're able, and then to hear your presentation on tips for advocates, how to avoid big mistakes in mediation. With that, my friend, the floor is yours.
So hopefully it's the Chicago Food Bank, and the participants have information to donate to. It's a great cause, and there's a lot of people in need from COVID and other reasons. So I hope people do, in fact, contribute. I want to talk about two mistakes that I think I see happening all the time in mediation. And we probably do 40 to 50 mediations a year. Most agencies that track firms that do mediation have us certainly at the very top, or one of the top in the country in doing mediation. First mistake that I see is they don't ask the mediator what's their style of mediation. And if you're not a student of the game, and I want to come back to that concept a little bit later on, there's a lot of people that go, what are you talking about, Roberts? Well, in 2007, 15 years ago, I wrote an article for the Loyola Law Journal on facilitative or evaluative mediation. In the early 2000s, there was a wide-ranging debate as to whether evaluative mediation was even mediation. In the early 2000s, there was, I would say, a preponderance of mediators that go, oh, no, I'm not evaluative. It was almost seen as a dirty word. Today, I think in commercial litigation, I want to emphasize that for a second, because I did a program with Jeff at Pepperdine. I think it was the Southern California Mediation Association. And people that were on the stage prior to me were doing religious mediations, meaning with institutions. I have no knowledge of that. Other people were talking about mediation than family law cases, child custody. And my God, I wouldn't want to try to give advice on that if a bus hit me. So I'm talking about commercial mediation, complex commercial cases. That's what I do. And now I would tell you the vast majority of people would go, oh, you know, I do evaluative. And I think the truth of the matter is that there's a lot of disinformation. There's a lack of sophistication as to what is the style of the mediator. So facilitative or evaluative. In 1994, 1996, Leonard Ruskin wrote the two seminal articles from an academic perspective on mediation. And they describe an axis, a box of evaluative, facilitative, broad-based. And that's where, if you look at any of the law review articles, you look at any of the dispute journals, where you start seeing this dichotomy of evaluative, facilitative, literally starts in 94, 96. And it starts this debate as to what is the difference, what is appropriate. I want to pause for a second before we get into a facilitative or evaluative to say, I don't think success in mediation is the settlement of the case. I think that's very important. I don't think success of a mediation or a mediator is whether they settle the case. The timing, is the issue right? Are the parties willing to enter into negotiations for settlement? All of that factors into it. To me, success in mediation is providing the decision maker with information that they can use to reevaluate their position and make an informed business decision. Let me say that again. Success is providing the decision maker, not necessarily the attorney, the decision maker, with information that they can use to reevaluate their positions and make an informed business decision. Should the case settle? What amount should it settle? What's the amount it's going to cost to go to arbitration or litigation? Number two, that information allows the decision maker to engage in a systematic modification of their initial positions. In other words, to reevaluate. Another word that I use is an organized retreat. The other side on a scale of 1 to 10 is at 9. I'm at 2. Do I really want a horse trade to have the matter resolved? Or do I want a principled basis that I explained to my boss, my board, the owner, how we settled the case? To get to that principled basis, I would contend that's an organized retreat. To get to the organized retreat, I would contend it is a modification of your initial position based on a principled basis. Successful mediation provides the decision maker with new information, a better understanding of their case. That's what I contend is a successful mediation. I believe at the end of the day that it's a combination of facilitative and evaluative, that how most good mediators settle commercial cases. An evaluative mediation should provide the attorneys, the decision makers, with information that allows them to make an informed business decision. Should the case settle? Should it not settle? What's the cost of litigation? What's my best case, worst case scenario at the next level? All of that in a successful mediation provides the decision maker with a report card to judge their team, to judge the mediator's efforts, to judge the attorney that represents them. If I don't settle, what's likely to happen? It's a chessboard. It's making an informed business decision. Do I move that piece? This is what I think. If I don't settle today, I can get in a courtroom or an arbitration. This is the cost of settling it. These are the risks. So it's that informed business decision that I think is the key to a successful mediation. Now, Jeffrey Stempel in 2000 said that the metaphysical trenches of mediation is one in which a mediator, while maintaining neutrality and impartiality at all times, attempts to both assist the disputants in finding acceptable resolution on their own, i.e. facilitative, also remains free to provide necessary guidance to the outcome at the next level, evaluative. I think successful mediation is a combination of both. But what's important is that you need to be able to ask the mediator, what's your style? Do they understand the difference between facilitative and evaluative? Until 1994, which is really not that long ago, there was no common terminology. That's only 28 years ago. Mediation, in terms of the legal process, is still in the early stages. It's been around in terms of an individual's legal career, but in the grander scheme of things, it's still in its infancy. So Riskin publishes a seminal article that describes evaluative, facilitative. And the top his box would be facilitative, and the bottom would be evaluative. On one side, you would have narrow, on the other side, you would have broad-based. And that box then facilitative narrow, facilitative broad, evaluative narrow, evaluative broad is what, on an academic basis, people looked at mediation and started discussing it as to what is the style in the 90s. Now, that debate of facilitative and evaluative in the 90s, in the early 2000s, the preponderance of mediators that I dealt with, the best in the nation, they were saying they were more facilitative than evaluative, because evaluative, people were thinking of Caesar thumbs up, thumbs down. It's not, the evaluative is not the deciding on the ultimate issue. But let's talk about what is facilitative, what is evaluative. The rationale behind facilitative process is the parties can work together constructively to resolve their disputes in a neutral, safe, and supportive environment. A facilitative mediator thinks that the barrier to dispute resolution is believed to be a failure to communicate effectively. The facilitative mediator assumes that the parties are intelligent, able to work together, capable of understanding their situation better than the mediator, and that the parties can develop a better solution than the mediator. Facilitative mediation focuses on the interest of the parties. The characteristics of a purely facilitative mediator: empathetic, counselor-like, helping the parties to repair their shattered relationship. Facilitative mediators seek to increase understanding between the parties, explore their interests instead of promoting a position, creates a collective environment, helps parties create a solution that is unique to their situation. In a typical facilitative mediation, the mediator is asking questions in order to understand the situation, subtly directs the parties to explore options and potential outcomes. Under a facilitative approach, parties expect the mediator to interfere as little as possible with the parties' discussion. They expect the mediator to facilitate and guide the discussion so that negotiations don't break down. It's an interest-based versus promoting a position. Emphasis on collaborative efforts. Facilitative mediations are described as process-oriented. Mediator is responsible for guiding the process. He or she does not provide their opinion or predict outcomes. Parties are responsible for arriving at the resolution themselves. The mediator is not seen as having expertise in the subject matter, but rather guiding the dispute. The mediator's purpose is to only ask questions versus suggest solutions. Mediator allows the parties to express their side of the issue, an opportunity to be heard. Mediator is described as a know-nothing intervener, sole purpose to facilitate the conversation. Now, a facilitative approach can be directive and non-directive under Ruskin's box analysis. A directive approach, the mediator educates the parties about the strengths and weaknesses in their position by having the parties evaluate and reevaluate their position. They ask questions, helping the parties develop proposals. Non-directive is understanding the issues, not understanding the positions. So four major tasks of a facilitator with a broad-based mediation perspective: assist the parties in developing and exchanging broad interest-based suggestions for settlement, helping the parties exchange proposals, helping the parties evaluate those proposals. I would contend that you don't see a pure facilitative mediator in a complex construction process. That the parties generally are sophisticated attorneys who are capable of issue resolution on their own. But something has occurred that prevents them from effectively engaging in issue resolution, problem solving on this case. Could be expert-based. It could be their clients want a gladiator versus a problem solver. It could be that there's two or three key elements that could go either way, and they're putting on their adversarial point, trying to get those issues the best of their ability, and they need help from a third party to get resolution. On evaluative mediation, it's based on a settlement conference, focusing on legal rights of the parties, evaluating the merits of the claim. It doesn't embrace the traditional adversarial method, i.e. you're not Caesar giving the ultimate resolution on a matter, but it is focusing on underlying substance and cause of dispute. People expect the evaluative mediator to have some substantive experience with the subject matter. I know what that motion practice is going to look like. I know what the cost of that motion practice is going to be. I've done a bad faith claim. These are the elements of it. Here's your chances of success. If it's a loss of efficiency or a lack of productivity claim, these are the elements of it. This is what traditionally is the recovery factor in the United States. Those are examples of substantive experience that people on different matters would want an evaluative mediator to weigh in. Evaluative mediation has been described as a realistic evaluation of the claim. It is an effort to have the parties see and their decision makers see the flaws and strengths of their case, predict the outcomes, evaluate the case components. It's a rational evaluation that the parties are seeking from the knowledge and of an objective third party. They're looking for the mediator to take positions that the parties want or need in terms of guidance for resolution. The barrier to resolution from an evaluative mediator's position is the parties are taking unrealistic opinions or the value of their claim is overvalued. It's a testing of the case as opposed to waiting for a binding decision by a third party, arbitration panel or judge. The evaluative mediator is seen as an agent of reality to help the parties reevaluate their position. Mediation in an evaluative setting provides new information that helps the parties realize the cost of litigation, the risk of litigation, the weaknesses and strengths of their case. It's a reality check. It's an honest assessment that hopefully brings parties together. Now, I've told you that I don't believe that there is pure facilitation in complex commercial cases, but I do believe that an effective mediator uses facilitative techniques to help solve the problem in addition to their evaluative expertise. I believe that if you look at why is mediation increased, and there's numerous articles that have looked at it, there's primarily 4 reasons. One, to avoid trial and arbitration. So the number of trials, anybody can look at information from the AAA, from Jams in Dispute, from a number of organizations that track the amount of trials. They've gone down precipitously. If you started practicing law in the 80s versus the 90s versus the 2000s, it's been a dramatic decrease. If you compare the amount of trials in the United States from the 60s to the 80s, there was a dramatic increase. Trials are expensive. Trials are not, as a general statement, a good value proposition to a business decision maker. Arbitrations, although typically beating the cost of a trial, typically you have a more informed decision maker of your own choosing, are still becoming prohibitively expensive, and business decision makers, as a general statement, want to avoid a third party giving them a binding result. They would rather get to a agreed upon result where they have the maximum control over the cost, over the settlement. So one of the reasons mediation is up is to avoid the trials, avoid arbitration. The second is that clients have become more sophisticated in alternative dispute resolution. They're more sophisticated in what they want. They don't want just an opportunity to be heard. They want to test their case. They want specific results in a mediation that isn't necessarily settlement. Third, they want substantive information. They want outcome predictive factors that can close the deal, that they can take back to their board, that they can take back to their owners. This is what the cost of litigation is going to be. This is what the likely outcome is going to be. And the last is they like to try the case on the cheap without having it binding. They like to be able to move pieces on the chessboard without taking their fingers off the piece, to try out what that argument looks like, to try out what those arguments are. So whereas facilitative emphasizes a collective collaboration and is trying to get the parties to be heard, I think that is a very important aspect of mediation. But at the same time, in evaluative mediation, the parties have to believe the neutrality of the mediator. Doesn't mean the mediator's trying to be liked. If somebody is saying 2 + 2 is 7, and you say, well, what, I'm missing a variable. Well, no, it's 2 + 2, it's 7. That's just bat crazy, right? That's not going to play well in front of an arbitrator, in front of a mediator, in front of a judge. And if party has bad information, part of the effectiveness of a evaluative mediation is to test those theories. Primarily, I believe, through closed doors, but also occasionally in public forums. But it's to test the theories and underlying conclusions. So I don't believe that there is pure facilitative, but I do believe that if someone says they're evaluative, you got to probe. You got to ask, well, what do you mean by that? How do you view evaluation? What do you think the roles are? I think that somebody, and I had a running conversation with numerous mediators since the late 1990s as to facilitative evaluation. In 1997 and 2000, people would say, oh, I don't do evaluations, Robert, so I'm facilitative. And I would say, well, did you have an impact on where the parties were seated? Did you choose the order of issues? If you met with one party and you talked 2 issues, are those the 2 issues you talked with the other party? All of that is part of an evaluative program by the mediator as to what they think is important, what do they think are the key issues to get addressed. So the time you spend on an issue, what issues you address, what parties you meet with, how long you meet with them, all of that adds up, I believe, into an evaluative process as to how the mediator sees what are the significant issues to be addressed to get the case resolved. I think evaluative mediation provides you information, gives you a predictive outcome, assists in solutions. I don't think that it is the mediator deciding on the ultimate issue. I think you're going to have a hard time getting that into evidence. I think your theory of the case is in the minority in that state. And I think you're going to have a hard time, if it goes to court, surviving on appeal. Those are all fact-based that a mediator can bring to the table that are assisting the client in testing their theories of the case. So what's the significance of that? I think the first mistake that attorneys, clients make in mediation is they simply say, hey, who's this mediator? And when it turns out the case doesn't settle, they think it's a failure. And so I've been involved in a number of cases where the parties attempted mediation and it failed. And I said, hey, we got to mediate. And they go, oh, we've tried that. It doesn't work. And it's like, walk me through what you did in the mediation. And ultimately, I think the paradigm of how they viewed the mediation and who they brought into the mediation was the failure. It was a lack of preparation. It was a lack of understanding of what were they trying to test in the mediation process. I think mediation allows you to test your theories of the case. How strong, how weak are they? It allows you to guess what the cost of litigation, arbitration, is at the next level. It allows you to understand the delta between how you see a case and how your opponent sees a case. It allows you to understand if it's pure cost differential, what that difference is and what's it made up of. So a good mediation, a good mediator in a complex commercial case, I believe, sets up a report card that allows the decision maker to judge the effectiveness of the mediator, judge the effectiveness of their attorney, judge the effectiveness of their team. If we don't settle, here's what the cost is to go to the next level. I have a 60% chance that I'm going to be below on a scale of 1 to 10. My opponent's at a 9. My initial position's at a 2. I think the cost of litigation is going to be 2. So therefore, my strike price, anything below 4, should be good. The other side is at 9. They refuse to settle below 7. If my information is accurate, if my theory is strong, if the other side refuses to come down, I should be able to go to trial. I should be able to have the result be a 4 or a 5 in a worst case scenario. And I save 2, not counting the value of time and money as opposed to what my opponent wanted. That's good information. That's making an informed decision. But it's holding your team accountable, your attorneys accountable as to that likely outcome. Is it cut and dry? Is it going to be a 4 or 5 at trial with the cost? Those are the things that I think an effective evaluative mediation gets to the heart of, and it allows the parties to make that informed business decision. Now, I've been in mediations where the intelligent IQ, the social IQ of the mediator in reading the audience and understanding how decision makers actually broker a decision has been the key to this matter being resolved. So nobody on this podcast should downplay the significance of an effective facilitative mediator in the process. You can have the proverbial brilliant doctor that has the worst bedside manner, and all they got to do is perform the operation, and you put up with the bad bedside manner. The problem in mediation, and the problem with a brilliant evaluative mediator that has zero bedside manner, the problem with that is that you still got to effectively work with the clients to get them to adapt it. It's not a medical procedure. They have to believe in it. They have to sell typically other people outside the room. So having a zero bedside manner, not having any skill sets on the facilitative side of the equation, that doesn't help make an informed business decision. It doesn't help the decision maker get to a point that they can decide that whether the case should settle. It doesn't help them as to what the price should be. So I would contend that it is a combination of evaluative, facilitative that makes for the best mediator. But that's for you to decide. That's the point. You need to be able to effectively determine what is this person's style and is it right for this matter. I had a major matter with Fortune 200 companies, and it was a battle of CEOs. And the key to the matter settling was finding common ground on a psychological basis with these CEOs. It wasn't so much the facts or the underlying data. There's other matters where it is heavily expert driven and who's likely to prevail. It's a cost base. Is the juice worth the squeeze? Different mediations require different skill sets. And that's another thing that I would contend in selecting the style, is how adaptable is that person, that mediator? Do they have a strength in facilitative or evaluative? Why are you choosing that particular style to solve this particular issue? I don't choose one style when I'm selecting a mediator. They're going to be evaluative, but it doesn't mean there are some evaluative mediators that look like Ed Asner, and they're gruff, and you think, you're lucky to be in their presence, and they give you a hard read of the issues of the case. And if it's a day mediation, and if it helps you as a sounding board make a decision, that's how the case is settled. The parties know what they're getting in that individual when the matter settle effectively, and they are able to pivot off that style, work with their clients to get resolution. But the style of the mediator, facilitative or evaluative, is important, and it's not an on-off switch. There are degrees. It's a subtle nuance that the better you understand the mediator style, I would contend, the more chance you have of making an informed business decision, thus the chance that you have a better opportunity of getting resolution, which isn't necessarily the day of the mediation, right? Could be weeks, could be months after the initial mediation. Issues that the parties need to think about, go back to their other constituents and talk about. So style of the mediator is very, very important. Now, the second mistake that I think parties make is the selection of the mediator. If you don't know the style of the mediator, it's kind of like a grab box where you don't know what you're going to get. But even if you have an idea of the style, here's the second biggest mistake that I see parties make. Number one, most attorneys don't mediate as much as we do. In the early 2000s, not uncommon to have large law firms dominated by litigation. The litigators did not mediate. They litigated. They went to the courtroom. Today, most litigators would claim they mediate. How effective they are on that is a different issue. But everybody, I would say, claims the ability to have knowledge to mediate. The problem is, it's like anything else in life. if you don't do it on a regular basis, your skill set is not, enhanced by your experience to have knowledge of what's good and what's bad. So what do you get? I track it when I teach at Northwestern. I track when I know large matters go to mediation. I'll call up the parties when it doesn't settle and ask them why. And typically I get this: oh, the mediator was horrible. That was mediator was just bad. I never get, oh, I didn't have my client prepared well. I didn't do a good job. Rarely do you get the attorney that says, yeah, it's my fault. They're always pointing to the failure of mediation as either the mediator's fault or the other side. And I'll ask them, well, what did you learn on the case? Oh, I got nothing. Really? You didn't come away from it with a better informed decision basis to decide what you do next? Oh, no, I didn't learn anything. All right, go back to my first discussion on evaluative, facilitative. I think a good evaluative mediator, even in a matter that fails to settle, the parties walk away with a better basis of information, a different view of the case. I think that's success, whether or not it settles. But when I hear that they think the mediator failed, that the mediator wasn't up to snuff, and I hear this, you could take the top, 10 rated mediators in the country. I constantly hear people going, oh, they're overrated. They didn't settle my case. And I ask them, so the definition of success is that the case settled on terms that you thought were favorable to your client. Oh, yeah. Well, I would contend that their paradigm of what is success and failure is skewed. But the second thing, and the point that I'm trying to get to, is I also think that 9 out of 10 times, people are asking for recommendations on mediators. And they don't ask in those recommendations, hey, did you have mediation in front of this person? Was it successful? Is the recommendation based on meeting at an ABA group? Is it based on a local bar association? Is it based because you personally know the person? What is the recommendation based on? And if they haven't been in front of that leader, how do they know how effective they are? I guarantee you, going to the first part of our discussion, yeah, no concept as to whether the person views themselves as evaluative or facilitative, or where on that paradigm they see their style, their skill set. So the first question is, hey, have you had a meeting with this person? What is their style? What did they do effectively? What didn't you like? The second thing that I always bring up is, if you want to do you like as a professor in college, the question has to be asked before you get your grade, right? Who did you think was a good teacher? Not based on the grades you got, but on your experience in the class. I think the same is true in mediation. A good mediator isn't because the case settled. For God's sakes, there are a lot of cases that the case is ready to settle. They're just looking for the third party to open the door. So it can't be based on, well, the case settled. Some of my best mediation experiences have been on cases that didn't settle. They shouldn't have settled. It wasn't right. There was additional work that needed to be done. But the mediator effectively took away to that resolution. They helped eliminate what were barriers, hurdles to the settlement, and they allowed the parties to effectively focus on 2 or 3 key elements. That as we worked the case, it became more effective, more for the settlement. So it's not, again, whether the case settled. A good mediator is not, oh, they settled it. You could have had a bad mediator, but a setbacks or the parties were able to the conclusion. that it needed to settle. So when you're asking for recommendations, have you been in front of that mediator? What is their style? Do you think the mediation was good just because it's settled? I think that you would be surprised at how little recommendations you receive. The people have actually had matters in front of that mediator. The best recommendations, I believe, are from people that had a mediation and their client paid more than they thought initially. Their client got less than they originally received, but they thought the process was great and they thought the resolution was great. So it can't just be on this perspective, well, I won, I did great. That is not a good way to evaluate the effectiveness of mediators. And I think that in so many cases, the basis of selecting the mediator is so profoundly flawed that you could have gotten the wrong mediator for that set of facts. Maybe you needed someone with a high emotional intelligence to work the parties, and you got a pure mediator. Maybe you got somebody that thinks they're evaluative, but they're light on the evaluation, and this really required someone to roll up their sleeves in private session and really force the issue as to, is that theory hold water? Are you really going to get that amount of recovery? Is the litigation or arbitration cost really going to be that factor? I think it's at least double or triple. If you disagree, fine, write it down. Client, now you have a report card. Your client says they can do it for X. What I found is when push comes to shove, you start getting rid of that flack and you get down to the seeds of the case. So selecting the mediator, I think one of the biggest problems is someone makes a suggestion. I think, how about Jeff Kitchaven? I don't know Jeff. I call 3 people. I get good reviews. Nobody can really identify his style. Nobody can tell me, how he does mediations. So here's the biggest mistake parties make. You tell the other side, I'm willing to consider Jeff. I want to pick up the phone and talk to him. You can be on the phone with me. I want to ask him what his style is. I want to ask him how he conducts a mediation. Why not pick up the phone and do your due diligence with the mediator? Why not have a conversation, with the other side's permission, with them separately, to ask what that style is, ask how they perceive a case. Is this a day mediation? Is it a 2-day mediation? So without picking up the phone, without having that due diligence, think about it. Most litigators, most attorneys, they would require due diligence on every other aspect of the case, but yet maybe on one of the most important aspects of the mediator, who is the mediator, they're relying on secondhand advice and they're not testing those theories out. Do I like the person? Do I think that I can work effectively with them? Little things count. Another hot tip that is just, if it's very complex, some of the best mediators are booked out 6 months, a year. Some of them have a specific day they can give you. Well, what happens if your case is complex? It's going to require several sessions. You're going to get your toe wet in the pond on the first session. It's going to pique ideas. The evaluative process is going to allow you to eliminate some of the barriers, but there's going to be issues yet to be determined. What is the availability of that mediator to follow up in a month, in weeks? So understanding the mediator's schedule, their availability, they could be brilliant, but if all they have is a day and then the next time they can see you is 6 months, maybe you lose the momentum of the case. So understanding not only the evaluative, facilitative style of the mediator, understand their general approach, but also understanding their docket. How much time do they have to give to you? It's very important, because there's many a mediation that I would contend is very successful that the parties are not able to agree on resolution. And they meet again and they get closer on the numbers, but there's still not a resolution. I do not believe effective mediation is a mediator trying to force that resolution on the parties. Well, they're only going to pay X. That's the best you can do. I just had that with a very good mediator. And he was right. In that mediation, in that day, the other side, what they offered was the maximum for that day. We didn't settle. The CEO worked with the other CEO and said, look, I'm going to court. If that's all you're going to offer, this is what we think we can get. You know, if you're not willing to do X, you know, we're going to litigate. They, on their own, reached a number. It was higher than what the mediator said they would pay on that day. The mediator was not wrong. The best the party would pay on that day was X. At Y 2 weeks later. That's not the mediator's fault. The mediator did a mediation. They got up to that issue. They prepared to go to the next. But what was presented during that day allowed the parties in a continued dialogue to get to the next step. About that mediator, I would say, oh, did a great job. Oh, the case settled? No, didn't settle. Well, they settled the case eventually. No, they weren't involved in the settlement. Well, how the heck is that mediator great? Because they set the stones in place, allowed the party, they set the stone in place for the path that allowed the party, and substantive, they allowed the parties to see the chessboard and see what the likely outcome of arbitration or litigation would be, and as to the range of the outcome was going to be. That, ladies and gentlemen, I think is how you judge an effective mediator. So, two things that I think are just bat crazy when I talk to people on mediations. One, they are clueless as to the debate that started from Riskin writing his seminal articles in the Harvard Negotiations Law Journal, 94-96, on facilitative evaluative. They're clueless as to the academic path that people have taken to figure out their style of mediation. I think that, like anything in life, if you continue to try to get better, to evolve, you're going to be better at whatever you do. I teach a class at Northwestern Graduate Engineering School. All of the participants have been out at least 10, 15 years. That desire for them to get better, why they're taking the class, is one of the hallmarks as to why these people go on and advance in their career. I think the same is true in alternative dispute resolution. You got to ask yourself, is that mediator that you had in 2000, are they the same? Have they evolved? Have they gotten better at their craft? The best are constantly trying to improve, to learn. There are some that are good, but what they do in 2022 is exactly what they did in 2014. There are some that when I say, hey, what's their shtick? They go, oh, that's derogatory, Roberts. And it's not. What I mean is most mediators have one or two tactics that they constantly draw out of their hat. And the fact of the matter is 90% of the mediations they have, 80%, they do those one or two tricks and they settle. And they have great success rate. And people use them because they're effective. But if that one or two trick doesn't work, they don't have anything else in reserve. Now, that doesn't mean they're a bad mediator. It just meant for that particular matter, they weren't the right choice. So understanding either by picking up the phone and talking to them, understanding by having people that had matters in front of them, understanding from participants where it didn't settle, but what they did helped eventually settle it. That's all in your control, in the mediator. So matter, you know someone in your firm that has a matter, and they go, why not? It was bad. Did you hear about mediation? If no, bad mark for you. If you asked them and they said, I don't have a style, not so good. It means they're not a student of the game. They haven't thinking through what others that have devoted their lives to alternative dispute resolution have focused on is and succeeds, why something fails. If a matter didn't settle and they don't know whether the timing was right, these are all things that you control as an advocate. If the other side is just crazy, right? 2 + 2 is 9. Well, an effective mediation says, look, I think you got the better argument. I don't understand how they get to that argument. I don't understand the basis. I've tried to get them articulated. I don't understand it. Sometimes that happens. And I would contend that an effective mediation, creating that report card of what's likely at the next step. If there's a fair and honest attorney on the other side, in most cases, I believe there is, they're going to report card coming out of that mediation, and they're going to know that event understand why recommending them. Why don't you pick up the phone? Those are 2 key ingredients as to mistakes I commonly see that if better at utilizing them, I guarantee more likely than not, you're going to not say the mediation failed because the mediator you selected them. It's like saying you were horrible in your selection of the mediator. You failed your client on a primary getting the right person to help settle it. The last thing I want to talk about, this is a huge problem in commercial mediations. And it's why, again, I believe evaluative mediation is critical. I see a lot of bad advice by consultants and experts. I see a lot of bad advice from what I call the peanut gallery. Oh, you got a great argument. You're going to win. Really, I don't know about you. There's very few things that are guaranteed in life, primarily death. You can avoid taxes and go to jail, still not pay. Death, no one's beaten that one yet. But I see all the time people missing the ball in mediation, proceeding to a courtroom because they have bad advice from experts. Oh, they didn't follow the contract. This is the cause of the problem. If it's expert, who's going to prevail in front of an arbitrator or a judge? And they're overconfident as to what the parties are selling. Now, that some consultants and experts try these consultants and experts make good money over the length of the litigation. They're not likely to represent those parties again, and they're making their bang for the buck while they can. Testing the theories of the information from your consultants and experts is a huge advantage in evaluative mediation. You do not want the academic answer from a third party that's binding. Your expert says the maximum you pay is 6. The other side wants 15. You base your strike point, you're willing to settle based on your expert. But if the evaluative mediation can say, man, that 6 is more like your middle ground, I think that you can easily pay based on the theories of the case, the evidence that's been presented, you can easily pay 10 or 12. That changes what your strike point is. You don't want to have that academic answer to what your experts are saying are the key facts. You don't want those decided at a third party level. Most expensive, least productive way to get resolution. So evaluative mediation has the added benefit of when it is the case, the delta between the parties is driven by expert advice, by consultants testing that theory. So testing of the case has traditionally been one of the values of mediation. I think it's added value when you strike in the evaluative aspect on it. So I have 3 minutes left. I hope this helped. I believe that the future of ADR is going to get nothing but bigger and brighter. I think that the amount of matters that actually go to litigation is continuing to reduce. And I think that the parties, if they do mediation effectively, not only save their clients huge amounts of money, but they get to a fair and accurate resolution, that organized retreat that I talked about earlier, that all parties can accept. And when the parties agree to the resolution, 9 times out of 10, assuming there's no buyer's remorse, and I think that's a timing issue, the parties are much more acceptable of selling that within their organization, psychologically believing that the ADR process worked effectively. So understand the style of your mediator, facilitative, evaluative. You don't have to be an ADR geek and read the journals of dispute resolution, but having a basic understanding of how that mediator perceives their style is critical for you to believe that you've had a successful choice in the mediator. If you don't mediate 30 or 40 times a year, be judicious in why you select that mediator. Understand, is that recommendation coming because they met someone at an ABA event? You know, did they have a nice cocktail and hors d'oeuvre with the person? Or is there a substantive basis? And is that substantive basis simply because the matter settled, or it settled favorably for them? Bad level of judging the effectiveness of a mediator, just as if the only professors you liked in school were the ones you got A's from. Just a bad dichotomy. Getting more sophisticated on the selection of the mediator is going to go a long way of stopping people going, yeah, you know, my God, I was the brightest one in the litter when I was born, and the reason this mediation didn't settle certainly wasn't me. I'm God's gift to ADR. It was the darn mediator. You select that darn mediator. Do your due diligence. Do your homework and get the right person, not so that the case settles, so that your client and you walk away from that mediation with better information that allows your decision maker to make a better informed business decision. That, ladies and gentlemen, is as good as it gets. I want to thank you for having me on. I love these. I watch them religiously. I think the cause of contributing to the food bank has never been more important in our country since probably the Great Depression. There are middle-class people that are in dire need that use these food banks. So please contribute to the Greater Chicago Food Bank or a food bank of your choosing. And I hope everybody that chose to listen to this, you're more than likely already committed to be a student of the game, meaning dispute resolution. Keep up the efforts. And by doing so, you help contribute that we have a group of people, attorneys, that are more committed to problem solving than to litigation. I think that's a good thing. So Jeff, turning it back to you, I want to thank you both for having me on.
Ken, thank you. That was a tremendous presentation, a really mature look, drawing that distinction between the success of the mediation is not necessarily the same thing as whether the case settled. That's an incredible touchstone from which everything else in your talk flowed, and it's a critically important distinction. You pretty much said it all, my friend. So on behalf of myself and Natalie and Jean, let me say thank you. Support to the Chicago Food Depository, chicagosfoodbank.org, if you're able to do so, please. Thank you all. Ken, thank you so much for this. And we are complete.
Thanks, guys.